So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, this time a standard large-scale siege between 8 players. And we make a bit of a trip down memory lane for this one, I suppose, because this is, of course, TOL FALAS, which has been part of the game for quite a while at this point. It's always been a fairly... It was a pretty well-designed map, to be fair. I think the only change that was made to a version of it, which is not active at the moment, was a pathway through this little area of the map that we're on at the moment, which I think was a good addition. It did add a little bit extra to the map in terms of ways that you could approach things, but for the most part this map has remained unchanged for quite some time at this point, although one thing that does rather stick out on this occasion is, rather imposingly, the ocean seems to have gone. So we are in the midst of a pretty severe retreat of the seas at this point in time, which for Lord of the Rings lore would be pretty big, but still, here we are. TOL FALAS, while the water may have gone, the pathways that you can take throughout the map most certainly have not, so we still see the bridges here. I have a feeling that this part of the settlement over here is going to be the epicenter once more, just because the defenders seem to have already set up a good defensive position over here, so I'm sure it will behoove them to fortify this part of the map rather than the other side that they can potentially defend. But we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off with Joey One Kenobi over here, who's playing as Ered Luin. On the attack this time around, Ered Luin, of course, a little bit more skirmish heavy than their dwarven brethren, but still have... Well, actually, also in melee, maybe they have a few more dual wielders, so maybe a little bit more about melee defense in addition to their armor, a little bit less about the overall damage that, in particular, Khazad-dûm can do in melee, but the support they have more than makes up for that, and if they get dug into a position and an engagement, they can be very, very effective with that extra armor or extra melee defense, I should say. High Thanes of Azaghal are the high-tier javelin units that they have at their disposal. Halberdier in melee as well, so I think really the Gatekeepers of Cardland are the only halberd skirmish hybrid unit other than the High Thanes here. Very effective unit at what they do though. Obviously high tier javelins can be so dangerous because even if you do close them down in melee, they're still going to be able to do a good amount of damage to you. Frost Spears of Azaghal, outside of some of the initial looks we saw of the Frost Spears, we haven't seen them be super effective lately, but that largely comes down to the fact that, well, more often than not we've seen Ered Luin on the attack actually, and sight lines are very important for these guys with their repeaters, and if they can get into those good positions they can do a lot of damage consistently and very quickly. So we'll see if Ered Luin are able to do that today. The upper tier mainline fighting unit that Ered Luin have are the Wardens of Thorin's Halls, like I was mentioning. Really good armour as you would expect from an upper tier dwarven infantry unit, but they do trade in that shield for a second weapon in their offhand, which means a little bit less effective at absorbing arrow fire, but even more effective at absorbing damage in melee. That is ultimately the trade-off that mechanical shift makes. But still, the armour will do most of the heavy lifting in terms of absorbing arrow fire, but in this situation where they have to wade through quite a lot of punishment, maybe that's not the case. Stonehewers, a basic but effective unit of dwarven shock infantry. This is where some armour piercing does come into the equation. When you're on the attack, that extra punch can be very useful. A more defensive unit are going to be the Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls. Of course, they do have a shield. Spears in general are a bit more defensively orientated, so they won't do as much damage as the rest of the dwarven infantry we've seen, but they will take an awful lot of punishment. More Stonehewers, more Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls, and at the end, to round things off, we've got some Warriors of the Blue Mountains as well. Basic though they may be, but basic dwarven infantry like this often has a way of paying for itself rather easily, and the General is going to be in the Juggernauts today, so a straight up full bore infantry unit as opposed to the High Thanes, which does mean the General will be in a little bit more of a risky place if they commit that unit early. Now then, over here we have Tommy himself, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Playing as Canned, he has got the Brotherhood of the Wain, which on a map like this can be really useful for scattering, faltering defensive lines, but if they are committed too early, ultimately they will come unstuck, but you can leave them for later on as well as the final nail in the coffin of defenders like this, but we'll see. Nurad Halberds, I mean recently actually we've seen Canned struggle a little bit. That's not due to the fact that they're underpowered or anything like that, it's just that the matchups they've been in haven't really been favourable, and tactics chosen in the open field maybe haven't been appropriate for the situation that was at hand. But in a siege, of course, things are a little bit more formulaic. Murad halberds and Murad footmen, the obvious choices to go for, though only one unit of halberds dipping far more heavily into the shielded Murad footmen, which is understandable. Again, armour piercing a big part of what makes Khan's infantry force a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more balanced in that regard. So we'll see. It can, of course, make a difference who they face off against, how effective that can be. Variag warriors here, unupgraded as they are, but still heavy swordsman units, which are a little bit cheaper, can be a good way of factoring in a little bit of melee defense, which Khand do lack in other areas. We have the nomadic axemen over here, a cheap armor piercing unit, which means they will melt away pretty quickly because of low melee defense and just low armor as well relative to other such units, but they do offer a little bit of melee punch in that regard as well. Brotherhood of the Spear and Brotherhood of the Axe, defensive and very offensive units respectively. The Blood Trolls, which I think we're going to see as a bit of a mainstay for Khand from now on, because it does offer a significantly different aspect to their infantry than what was there previously. Of course, they are effectively trolls in melee, pretty devastating and damaging as trolls tend to be. And it also offers a bit more of a damage focus, which Khand do have, but they accomplish it mainly through armor piercing, whereas trolls, they can just smash most units to paste. Nomadic archers and nomadic marauders as well, so some javelins and some archers, and finally the storm guard, as effective as they always are. Looks as though we're going to see a bit of a crisscross over here, as the Misty Mountains, played by winged swordsmen, seem intent on going towards the bridges, whereas Harad, under Tweak's command, are going to be going the opposite way. So we've got some goblin infantry, of course, a very numerous force, the Misty Mountains, regardless of what kind of army you choose to bring. Even if you go quality heavy by Misty Mountain standards, you're probably going to have a pretty big army. I mean, this is a huge amount of goblin infantry. This is going to be another one of those weird compositions, I'm sure, where he's delved into the red limit on several occasions if this is the amount of regular, effectively fodder that he has brought. Blackback Mountain Berserkers, a couple of units of the White Urks, which I believe is going into the red limit actually. I mean, they're not too special in terms of what they offer. They're effective, of course, but going into the red limit is something you don't see an awful lot of, but still, hefty amount of armor piercing. Drake Broodlings, and we also have a huge amount of trolls by the looks of things, several cave trolls, several snow trolls, and the troll drummers as well. So I mean, this is a huge amount of punch, but if it goes wrong, there's not really a huge amount to back it up. I mean, this will be a good litmus test, I suppose, of just how powerful trolls can be, although Misty Mountains trolls aren't as adept at staying alive, shall we say, as stuff like the Olag High from Mordor, but still a unique composition, which winged swordsman does seem to be delving into a little bit more recently. Then we have Harad going for perhaps a little bit more of a numbers-focused infantry approach to perhaps make up for the fact that the Misty Mountains have gone very unconventional, with beast hunters, javelins, of course. Southron archers, basic though they may be, numbers in terms of attacking archers can often be a bit of a be-all and end-all kind of situation. Serpent archers as well, heavier, and I don't think the poison will be too much of a factor for attackers in this kind of situation, but it's nice to have nonetheless. Warband, we've got the Demons of the Desert, who recently as well have been, while Harad have had a bit more success maybe than Khand, the Demons are a unit which have struggled a little bit to assert themselves on battles, and if the defenders are doing their due diligence, they should struggle here as well, because they are fairly vulnerable to missiles. And that is of course how defenders in 3v5s tend to have to approach things. Champions of Nafrat and Trollmen, heavy hitting of course, the Muhad Berserkers, reasonably heavy hitting as well, though far less survivable. Serpent Guard in and amongst the ranks as well, as more of a regular infantry unit that pack on a bit more armour than their contemporaries. And finally, among the attackers, we have Lothlorien, played by Hidden. He has brought a ballista, seems to be going towards the middle of the map, which is fair enough. The ballista will be probably at its least effective over here, especially seeing as the runic artillery is menacing them on the horizon. Lorien archers and actually regular Galathrim axemen, of course, the twin ranged punch that Lothlorien have from their bowmen and their throwing axes make them pretty devastating at most ranges, and of course when they do get into melee as well, they're pretty damaging as well. Very damaging, but of course Lothlorien are also a very expensive army, maybe without the defensive impunity that Imladris enjoy, but it's pretty damn close. It's as close as you can get really, outside of the dwarves perhaps. Galathrun warriors are hidden, obviously armor-piercing punch, spearmen, and bladesmen, so padding their army out a little bit with some more of these basic units. They will struggle if under extreme ranged pressure because of their lower armour, but the numbers are still necessary perhaps. Kindred of Celeborn, and then the 2 Silverthorn arrow units as well, Galathrun nobles and Galathrun riders, so all of the high tier projectiles are here, that elven quality. Skipping across to their opposite numbers then, we already know who this is because it's Rhun, the Dragon's Breath cannon, way up here on the high ground, which is going to be a problem for the elves because, I mean, the damage that they take is going to be multiplied a little bit. And it's interesting that the Misty Mountains with their smaller force are coming over to help Lothlorien. You get the sense that numbers may be put under a little bit more pressure here from the attackers, and I mean the Dragon's Breath could be ideal in that situation. A few hits is all it's going to take really to get their money's worth. Scion Rim, good defensive bastion, and they will need to be. Trolls coming their way in numbers might be a bit of a problem because spears tend to be pretty poor against trolls. Spear malice does apply to them after all, but it'll be good at dealing with some of the pressure that the elves will be putting on them. More Scion Rim back here. Of course, 3v5 means Rhun should be able to afford all of their very best units. Chariots for the defenders as well. The Wain Riders of Rhun. Personally, I think of all the chariots, I mean, they do have good numbers, which is nice, but in terms of projectiles, the archers on the runic chariots are probably the least impressive, but having more numbers for chariots, I think, is the more important thing. So I wouldn't say they're my least favourite in the game, but I do think the Brotherhood of the Wain with their crossbows are a little bit better, just at dealing that latent damage outside of crashing into the enemy. But it is interesting that the defenders also have the ability to do that, especially against the elves. Probably at its most useful against the elves over here if they don't get caught up on the trolls. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen can be potentially devastating with their unique ammunition, and regular crossbows, we know all about them as well, upgraded as they are, just to give them that little bit of extra survivability against stuff like elven arrows, which it will help, but obviously crossbows are at their best when they can fire without any sort of reprisal, but if the elves are doing their job, they shouldn't allow that to happen. Dragon's Wrath crossbows, 2 units of them, going into the red limit on the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, which high potential damage, but you also need a good angle of fire, so we'll see if the Warlord can do that. We also have a couple of units of the Gamperim and the Carmel's Chosen, which is a very strong unit of bodyguard, sword and board infantry, of course. Moving over to the central army, Mirkwood under Alexios 22's command. Mirkwood we have seen be very effective actually on the open field of late. We'll see if they can transfer that to siege battles, and considering what has helped them win in those field battles has been their ranged superiority, long-range superiority with their high-end archers. The Elder Royal Council, the best among them, more Silverthorn arrows this time for the defenders, of course. Going to be difficult for them to build up any sort of momentum. Elder Pathfinders have also been effective on the open field as well. I mean, we'll see what they can do, because if they do get bottled up in TOL FALAS, it can be a little bit awkward, but there are a lot of trolls running around. I mean, to be fair, there may be good opportunities for this kind of unit, considering the composition of the attackers. Not a huge amount, well, it's not an overwhelming amount of anti-cavalry. Crossbows would be a bit more of a problem as well. Elder Council, good javelins, good backstop for getting some armor-piercing damage done to the attackers as they move forward. Plenty of Hiriek, which, especially with the armor upgrade, really do represent Mirkwood's best front line, because they are very defensively skilled. The Elder Palace Guard have been effective, of course, in the previous battles as well. Very multifaceted. All of the trimmings, really, in terms of anti-cavalry and armor-piercing and all of that. Elven King's Guard have been effective. Hiri Peng, so all of the heavy archers. I mean, it's an expensive army, as you would expect. Hiri Lang upgraded as well. There's probably a couple of hidden units, but not too many, because that is all of the very best that Mirkwood have to offer, and all of it has had its armour upgraded as well. So it won't be an overwhelming amount of hidden units to reveal themselves, but still, we know what Mirkwood can do when they're at their best. And finally, Tintin commanding Numenor. Numenor, of course, in terms of a roster, haven't got too many ways in which they can approach things when they have this much in terms of money, because they'll be trying to dump as much of it into their high-quality heavy infantry as possible. Pharazim Swordmaster is a fantastic heavy swordsman, of course. And then we have kind of a big blob of units. We'll try to make out what we can. The Seafarers with their javelins, Steel Bows with their heavy damage projectiles. We've got the Axe Guard of Almenelos for that armor-piercing edge. Shield Guard and Cohorts representing the core of the Numenorian infantry in terms of spears and swords, respectively. The pikes are in amongst here as well. Nari Sentinels, to absolutely no one's surprise, I'm sure. Especially seeing as Mirkwood are on the field, you do need to bring phalanx units, and of course Rhun don't have access to pikes either, so it will be very much on Numenor to fill that particular void, but it looks as though they've done so with gusto here. Royal Legion of Armanelos over here as well, of course, a fantastic sword and board unit. Trebuchet of Numenor, that will need to retreat into a good position. I mean, artillery is interesting now that it's not just an instant kill when artillery hits one another. There is a bit more of a back and forth here. The Trebuchet could be fantastic at dealing with blobs of infantry either on the bridges or maybe on one of the choke points around there, because I imagine that's how the defenders are going to approach things. It's the modus operandi for most defenders on this map after all. But that also means we'll probably be making a bit of a decent sized cut here as the attackers move their way into position and organise themselves into where they want to attack, and the defenders start to dig in as the attackers move forward. So I'll rejoin when the battle is seeing its first blows struck. When you look at it from this angle, it's pretty clear to see why the Dragon's Breath is positioned here, especially against the joint forces of Lothlorien and that somewhat offbeat Misty Mountains force from Winged Swordsmen. A few well-placed shots might be all it takes to get some really good value, albeit not so much against the standard Goblin infantry, of course, but still, kills are kills, and they are going to need a good amount more of that, you would suggest, the defenders. I quite like the composition of the defending armies, actually. Rhun are pretty well balanced with that armour-piercing edge to them, and then of course you have Mirkwood with their long-range strengths, which we've seen pretty substantially recently, and Numenor, of course, with their more heavy-duty quality in comparison to the elves. The one problem they may run into, which is more of a universal thing with 5v3s, is the fact they may just run out of manpower. We have seen a few examples of quality-only setups in this sort of situation come out on top recently, but whether or not they're going to be able to do the same thing here, we'll have to wait and see. Dragon's Breath having done a decent amount of damage right from the off here, but the ballista getting into place, and I mean, as has already been mentioned, artillery is not necessarily going to be destroyed in one shot anymore, which is good because previously, of course, one of those Dragon's Breath cannons would already have been destroyed by the ballista. They need to be careful, of course. Artillery does have that tendency of sliding off hills, but this is still good for the attackers, forcing the Dragon's Breath in behind some terrain. They will still be able to get some good side swipes there if they do manage to position it behind those boulders, but we'll see how that develops. That is the only reason the ballista would have been brought, I would assume, from a Lothlorien perspective. Or maybe they were hoping they would be in the more open terrain over here. Still no sign of Harad and Khand, and of course the Blue Mountains beginning their advance over here, as is often the way on TOL FALAS. It's going to be the attempt to try and claim this hill over here before they make any meaningful attempt to cross the bridges down there, partially due to pathfinding, of course. I mean, it's a bit of a weird situation here because the bridges will still be the only method by which they can cross this chasm here, but of course, in actuality, because the water is no longer here, they could just walk down there, but of course it is still impassable terrain. The water may not be visible, but the map was still created with that in mind, at least that's certainly what I assume. Dragon's Breath trying to creep ever further forward. You can see the attacking ballista managing to kill off some of the crew, and of course the Dragon's Breath crew is a pretty strong unit of infantry, so even if you can't destroy the big cannons, you can still kill off some pretty impressive infantry in for the deal. And one problem the Dragon's Breath do have in an artillery duel is the models for them are enormous, so the chances are, especially for a ballista, hits are going to be fairly easy to land. Just having a look over here, the water, when the water isn't present on the map, just having a look at where the piers used to be, it's a little bit apocalyptic when you look at it like that, isn't it? Seeing those hypotheticals of what the Earth would look like with the oceans drained is a little bit, I don't know, it's daunting in some respects. I'd be out of a job, certainly. Elder Royal Council in a good position here, of course. I mean, getting across bridges is pretty tough at the best of times. That will be doubly so if you're under Silverthorn arrow fire. But we are now going to start to see the first foray into action for the attackers on this side of things as well. And actually the attackers will be able to land more consistent blows more quickly over here, you would suggest, than having to be under the cannon fire of Rhun across those bridges on the other side. Nomadic archers, of course, very good in a skirmish fight, and the Numenor are strong, but they don't necessarily have the easiest counter-skirmishing options. Numenor Royal Guard, one such option perhaps, but they will be hoping that they don't have to dip into those reserves too early, I would suggest. Good frontliners, shield guard, plenty of cohort in behind. A little bit of armour-piercing edge as well. It's most useful against the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, but they may not have the luxury of choice here, and it will still be good at dealing with the studded armour that can traffic in as well. Over here, meanwhile, Carmel's Shadow Guard revealing themselves. Hidden as they were, they do have to be a bit careful though, because the ballista will find them a very tempting target, though of course they cannot actually be targeted when they're not revealed. Though of course in order to reveal them they just need to put some units right at the base of the cliff. Rhun set up with the numbers. I mean, I did see the Drake Broodlings here, a unit which can barrel through ill-prepared positions, so you need to make sure you have those numbers. I mean, I think the sheer presence of the trolls along with the drakes here is going to mean that Rhun have to pretty much go all in right from the outset here. If they do that, I mean, they do have the damage to be a problem to this kind of very peculiar Misty Mountains force. Meanwhile, arrows targeting down the unshielded blackback berserkers. I mean, certainly a good choice of target. Two units of Carmel's Shadowbow certainly have the damage, one of the more dangerous units that Rhun could face over here. I mean, I remember saying in the composition phase that the Misty Mountains, even if they go for a quality-centric build, by their standards, it's still going to be a big army. That isn't really the case here. Winged Swordsman with his trolls has managed to find a way for that not to be the case. I mean, these Carmel's Shadowbows are taking a real beating here at the hands of the ballista, so time will tell whether this proves to be worthwhile. Consistent hits. They are managing to dump an awful lot of their ammunition here. Not huge casualties done yet, but that will start to mount. Meanwhile, Ardenheim Shadowbows doing the same thing that the Carmel's Shadowbows are doing on the other side, and no wonder, with the arrival of the attacking infantry, Numenorian Shield Guard and Cohort facing off against the Moonhide Berserkers and dismounted Serpent Guard. Of course, quality-wise, Numenor will be quite happy in the outset, but 5v3s often start off that way, so the attackers won't be panicking just yet. But unsupported or unprotected skirmishers here means the Wooden Realm Axemen going forwards with a bit of an offensive action. They need to keep this up though, because now that they've committed themselves, if they try to retreat, they'll be shot up badly as they do so, and unshielded lighter elven units like this will not want to take the level of damage that will be coming their way as a result of that, and they should do very nicely against most of these kind of units in melee, especially the very lightly armoured Haradrim. These elven axemen should output decent damage and be able to defend themselves well enough as well with those high melee defense values. Good amount of chaos being sown there, and of course it means that reinforcements are not going to be able to make it forward for this detachment of the Harad army. Have been forced back still. The Rangers' bows not being utilised further just yet. Norad footmen moving forward to try and sweep back against the Woodland Realm Axemen, starting to take consistent damage here. A lot of missiles heading their way. Trying to use the terrain as a bit of a buffer here, Alexios. Not a bad idea, but has this been worthwhile? A whole unit of infantry used as a delaying action? Would you trade one unit of Woodland Realm Axemen for the units that are over here? But the problem is they're not killing them off quickly enough. Not a bad idea, but I don't think it's really paid off. I'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Meanwhile, Warriors of the Blue Mountains starting to cross. Not drawing the ire of any skirmishers just yet, which is not too surprising in the grand scheme. The most entry level of Dwarven units may be strong, but you still don't want to be using them in an ideal situation. Dragon's Breath are here. Trying to utilise their archers now. The poison projectiles and going after a good choice of target as well. These strong crossbows I mentioned in the deployment phases, that armouring them up like this will be the reason why, but they don't want to just hang out here in full view of elven archers. I mean, this is the sort of thing which in a 5v3, if you allow it to continue for too long, it's going to result in your defeat. Those crossbows are going to be absolutely vital for the chances of the defenders moving forwards, you would imagine. Look over here, forcing them back into a more familiar defensive shape, but once again these archers maybe biting off a little bit more than they can chew. I mean, they are decent in melee, the nomadic archers, but not up to the same level as extremely well equipped Numenorian spears. Will come Harad spearmen, who are also no match for them, but at least they understand what their job is very clearly. To fight and die. Arnheim Shadowbows taking a few hits in return. Again, among the Ranger class units, they are pretty damn resilient, as is in keeping with Numenor perhaps. But the damage is still there. They'll continue to deliver that damage. Muhad Beast Hunters shaken. This front line, of course, has held up pretty well. Some elves have joined the front line now as well, just to give a bit of finesse to the Numenorian steel. Looking solid, the footmen arriving to keep the attack going, but they're going to need to be here in more substantial numbers if they want to get some forward momentum here. The attackers, Numenorian Shield Guard, taking point-blank javelin fire. I mean, this is where the attackers seem to be having some good fortune, utilising their archers and javelins in depth, so even if one unit isn't doing quite so well, another one will do the business, and it only takes a few of them to be worthwhile in a 5v3 like this, and every Numenorian spearman lost is a real problem for defenders. Softened up a little bit, still not to the extent where Haradrim spearmen will be able to defeat them, you would imagine, and indeed, I mean, that is a big army. I mean, Harad and Khand, in terms of numbers, it represents the single biggest concentration of attacking forces on the field as a result of the Misty Mountains' slightly peculiar stance. Strong crossbows still there. I mean, snow trolls moving forward in a huge mob, and spears don't tend to be the best unit to bring to bear against trolls. I mean, the Sarn Rim are decently resilient, but trolls do an awful lot of damage. I mean, phalanx units are not necessarily the best either. So the Gamp Rim, I mean, they're close by. They will actually be pretty good against the Drake Broodlings, though. They do classify as cavalry, after all, so these halberdiers will actually make very quick work of the Drakes. I was worried for the Warlord for a second there, but it's actually worked out pretty well, and it may well be a result of him paying closer attention to proceedings than me. But he is going to need something with a little bit more of a well-rounded feel to it. Again, Rhun don't necessarily have the most obvious units as for troll killers. I suppose the Carmel Shadow Guard would probably be the best choice. Plenty of damage on them, but this is going to be an issue. I mean, this could be the defining moment of the whole battle. If Rhun are unable to withstand what the Misty Mountains are going to throw at them here, the whole defence could come crashing down. Here are the Shadow Guard, though. They do reveal themselves. The best force to respond to all of those trolls, and a decent amount of them as well. Trolls, of course, a little bit more of a scary proposition than they used to be, so this isn't quite the hard counter that it once was, but it's still the best that Rhun have got. Poison projectiles flowing overhead, again doing good damage. Rhun caught flat-footed maybe a little bit, and in a siege like this I'm always a little bit confused as to how that can happen. They have to leave their strength on the front, I suppose, but there is cover that can be used here. If you weren't intending on bulking up your entire army in the narrow gap over there, then cover of the buildings needs to be more of a priority than this, I would suggest. Defeat seems certain for them for now. I mean, some elves have also made their way forward who should be pretty good against the Shadow Guard. Again, these crossbows caught out also, and they're not particularly good in melee. Armour upgrade or no, and here come the trolls once again. you know what the Winged Swordsman is going to do when he has this kind of composition, so you need to be less stingy with all of your reserve infantry here. They're going pretty much all in with regards to their strengths, so you need to do the same, otherwise you're going to be punished for it. And that, I think, is what is happening so far. We'll quickly go and have a look at what's going on the other side of the battlefield, which it's a little bit more by the books, admittedly, because all the compositions are a little bit more conventional, but for the moment, at the very least, the defenders holding up well enough. 8 nomadic marauders, proving to be a little bit of a pain for these Numenorian infantrymen. This front line over here has weathered a big storm and has managed to kill off an awful lot of attacking forces. More of them arriving, but they're actually decreasing in terms of quality. We've got Southron spears and now nomadic axemen, so if they can just keep themselves organised, some ranger volleys just to really twist the knife here. So the defenders will be far happier with this, perhaps. And also the trebuchet trying to bank its shots, perhaps. Now add Stormguarder over there. It's not the easiest shot for the trebuchet, admittedly. I mean, the angle's okay, but you need to get it sort of ideal if you're going to hit some of these really juicy targets over here, all of the trollmen. Those chariots as well. Those chariots are probably wishing they could be over on this side of the field at this point, given the potential benefits. The trolls are pulling back though, so perhaps seeing that Rhun have now brought their strength to bear, they're going to pull back just a little bit and wait to attack again. Having to arc their shots, the Narim, as well, setting the whole settlement ablaze, really. Some of the buildings starting to show a little bit of wear and tear as well. There's much more like it though. Whiter at Fearmongers. We'll be going halberd to halberd with the Gamp Rim. The presence of the Carmel's Chosen is certainly a calming thing as well. What was that? That was artillery of some description, but what artillery? Dragon's Breath shooting, or trying to shoot into the side of these units. Goblin Infantry, huge amount of them routing actually, 185 of them are routing into the runic force, so they won't be returning later on. They'll get butchered as they go into the halberd line. Throwing axes, ripping overhead, the Warlord in a bit of a stronger position now. Crossbows starting to unload as well. Just one unit of the Scion Rim over here. Got a couple of units of Guildsmen that could be drafted across if the Trolls decide to come this way. And also now able to shoot into the settlement, the Carmel's Chosen. Galatharim Axemen. I've seen a few examples of the throwing axes fizzing overhead, but I think it's actually been the poison arrows that have been more substantial. Crisscrossing back and forth with the flaming projectiles that Rhun are trafficking in. So move forward. Troll drummers will keep most of these units pointing the right way, save for a direct artillery hit, of course. Having a little look over here, we have got an advance across the bridges, but again, I mean, those 2 units of standard Dwarven warriors, this would have been alright as an opening gambit if reinforcements were intended to follow them across, but that is not the case, so effectively not really a worthwhile attack. Peeling off them though, interestingly enough, the Ents are an interesting unit for Mirkwood to be able to bring as well. We've seen them be useful for them, definitely gives the Sylvan Elves an interesting wrinkle in their roster. Yeah, they're going to need to send over some reinforcements if they hope to make anything stick here, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So in terms of a trade back and forth, the Elves will be happier with this. I mean, it's a unit of Spearguard of Thorin's Halls as well, some of the better and more resilient infantry that Ered Luin have at their disposal. Further here, footmen making their way forwards. I mean, they're certainly keeping the embers of this attack lit over here, but it has been a slog for them. With the numbers that Khand and Harad have, however, patience will be a virtue for them, hoping that the defenders run out of the supporting resources and then they can slowly but surely grind through them. When you've got the level of infantry quality that Numenor have, it is maybe a little bit of a risky game to play. But it's also what these 2 evil men factions are set up to deliver on this occasion. Harad's just down there. I mean, they're getting some good javelin volleys into the side as well, which is another reason for them to be cheerful. They are having some joy in those regards. Victory is a distinct possibility. They're up here, now in our Royal Guard, firing away in a good position, of course, more defensively minded than the Ardenai and Shadow Bows, so they're not going to be doing damage at the same rates. But any damage is good damage at this juncture. Uriek said they did peel off units from that one unit of warriors, but they have now returned to finish them off, so the Blue Mountains, to be fair, those are the only units the Blue Mountains have committed forwards, and as the most naturally quality-centric, well, actually no, Lothlorien, I guess, even more, well, similar levels of quality. Mirkwood, meanwhile, what's happening over here? The Trolls moving forward yet again. Seafarers of Nindamos. Green Spirit broken by the looks of it. Yeah, and the Trolls moving forward on that undefended wing. The Wain Riders of Rhun doing damage as the Misty Mountains move forward, but it's on standard Goblin Infantry, so I don't think the Misty Mountains will be too bothered about that. Rhun in danger here, and now the Drake Broodlings. I mean, the Drake Broodlings are a very annoying unit to deal with when they're doing this, but the obvious remedy for them is to set up a defence that they can't break through initially, and to have anti-cavalry units, which Rhun didn't lack. Already pulling back by the looks of things to what is clearly intended to be the final stand, but I mean, it's all well and good if Rhun do this, but they could be leaving their allies in the lurch here. A lot of force is still concentrated right on the front lines. And now dismounted Serpent Guard are pulling through, so across the battlefield we're starting to see good signs for the attackers. Serpent Guard trying to make their gains stick. Myriad Warriors victory almost a certainty for them as well. Yeah, going to need more reinforcements, or maybe even to retreat. I mean, there's still too much for Tintin over here to just leave and expect for them to have a good time of it going later on into the battle. They end up losing all of these units, even if it is a fighting loss. It's not the sort of thing that you can sustain in a 5v3, I don't think. But we'll see. 2 units of Naru Sentinels. Back to the wall style. Rarely have I seen the defenders manage to take losing engagements like this and inflict so much damage on the attackers that it ends up being a good thing for the defenders. Still the Royal Guard. Trebuchet crews moving forwards. I mean, you can see the momentum that the attackers have claimed in the settlement. I mean, that is what this army is for, ultimately, from the Misty Mountains. This trolls and brute force approach. I mean, trying to fight fire with the Ents now, but I mean, the difference in terms of numbers, the Entwives, in all fairness, are more comparable to stuff like the Olag High, some of the stronger trolls, in terms of performance, but numbers are a problem here. The bouncing projectile of the Trebuchet doing some damage there. I mean, I suppose the good thing for the defenders is that once the Misty Mountains have expended their ability to do this, they don't really have much else in their army that they can call upon. Like, Goblin Infantry is so low in terms of quality, especially against Numenor and Mirkwood that have a budget behind them. Lothlorien archers, though, I mean, Lothlorien of good quality. The Wain Riders backing themselves into a corner. If they have a breakout assault towards the tail end of the battle, the Wain Riders could be useful, but I mean, if they do end up getting bottled up, I don't really see how they get used effectively. We'll wait and see. Dragon's Breath Cannon, I mean, I suppose that is the saving grace as well of this Misty Mountains army, is the fact that they don't have the numbers to spread themselves out across the field evenly. So if Lothlorien do decide to focus on one position, they might end up getting pinned in the back by Dragon's Breath and Elven King's Guard are up there as well. Plenty of good damage. Surrounded, as they now are, by threats, other than the route that used to lead to the docks and the sea, now to just a barren waste. Goblin infantry pushing forwards in terms of sheer numbers. Entwives, Blackback Berserkers are in there, only 6 of them though. And Hiri Lang coming across, so reinforcements from their allies. Rhun have managed to post up in a decent position as well. That has to be the Misty Mountains General, I would assume. Interesting loss, that. Never seen Trolls route before. Speaking of which, there's also the Candish equivalent, the Blood Trolls of Cand, getting right in amongst things. I mean, Hiri Lang, not a terrible answer to them, but damaged as they are, they won't be enough, especially with the damage rate that they have. Pikes, X-Guard. Over on this side, meanwhile, this unit of Nara Iris Sentinels was isolated, and as a result, haven't performed particularly well against this mini Candish attack. Mini in the grand scheme of things, anyway. And now, Stonehewers taking hits. Numenorian steel bows, those deadly projectiles. I mean, the Stonehewers will fall away pretty quickly. Are they the most devastating unit, though? Are there better choices? I mean, actually, come to think of it, those are the Elder Pathfinders making a nuisance of themselves here in the backfield. Doesn't look like there's too much in the way of damage, though, and unfortunately for them, with Brotherhood of the Wain and Galathrim Riders, they can be zoned out fairly effectively, I think. I don't think there's much. The Elder Pathfinders might want to just circle the houses and try and follow where the Misty Mountains went. Frost Spears of Azaghal and Juggernauts. From this position, it's a story I've seen many times. I would expect the attackers to go on in this fight and win, although the attackers outside there do maybe need to pick up the pace a little bit. They're having some success, but I'm going to look over here. The Ents have certainly done their job again, absolutely wading into a bloodbath as they did previously, and have managed to do the business. Those Mirkwood units as well are going to rip through goblins. The remaining trolls, weak. Look over here, Axguard of our Manelos charging in. Initial attack seems to have yielded some results. Standard Lorien archers, not ideal for facing off against such a foe, but the lower defensive values of Axemen may yet save this veritable horde of elven bowmen. Is that the end of the Misty Mountains? Looks like it. Goblins are gone, trolls are all dead. General killed. So I mean, now I guess the only question is whether or not Lothlorien can take advantage of the holes that were made. That was always the issue. I mean, domineering in that aspect of fighting, but it's also the only thing Winged Swordsman's army could do, but did it well enough. And ultimately a lot of the... it took a lot of Mirkwood support, you have to say. A decent portion of it to actually turn this force back. And it's also like, it did drive Rhun back to what I assume will be the intended final stand. Mirkwood still scrapping in the town centre. But the Blue Mountains having another go at crossing the bridges. I mean, Warns of Thorin's Halls, of all standard Dwarven infantry, they're probably the best suited for fighting elves because of that heightened melee defense they have. And when you combine it with the armour, the overall defensive values for them are incredibly impressive. Maybe a bit more well-rounded than the elves because part of it is due to their armour. Over here, Stonehewers joining the fray as well, so more pressure being applied. All of those Mirkwood units that went back further into the settlement, all well and good, but not able to hold on to the front for too much longer, especially considering this is the last bastions of the Numenor holdouts up on the hill. They've done a decent job here and still fighting well, but surely those days are numbered with some trollmen arriving for that extra spike of damage. Southron Warband doing their part. Blood Trolls, only 5 of them remain, in all fairness. Galathron Riders, I mean the Blue Mountains. Elder Pathfinders will still be buzzing around in the open field, so I mean it behooves the Blue Mountains really to try and get across those bridges and keep that pressure up. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Elder Royal Council as well. Lothlorien Shield Guard coming down to try and assist the elves, along with Ardenheim Shadow Bows. I mean, pincer attack on the Stone Hewers, it will be enough to stymie the dwarves for the time being. And then Elder Palace Guard also going to do some damage. In fact, in the background over there you can see Pathfinders managing to charge into the Galathron Riders. I mean, off the charge, that will do a good job, and also charging into the Juggernauts as well. I mean, their defensive stats and the fact that they're relatively untouched will be enough to prevent them from getting absolutely clattered in that instance. And unfortunately as well, the Pathfinders, it may end up not being... I mean, it was the right idea, but because of the type of unit that they're facing, Galathron Riders, even if they do get the charge off, the Riders can defend themselves in melee and then shoot them when the Pathfinders leave, and Mirkwood Cavalry is not the most resilient in the grand scheme of things. Oof. The Dragon's Breath Cannon absolutely grilling the Frost Spears there. Good hits, good damage. I mean, there is an air of inevitability to the attackers managing to get through over here, but it's been a little bit more of a bitty engagement than they would have been wanting, and as a result, I don't know how much longer Lothlorien have either. What kind of numbers Lorien can bring to the table, probably not going to be sufficient. I mean, they're winning over here. I guess the question really is how aggressive do Rhun want to be with the units that they've sequestered away up there. Dragon's Wrath crossbows, of course, still an interesting thing. Big potential power on them. Still got a few units here in the shadow of the keep at the back as well. Galathram Axeman trying to hide away over here, but Alpha Sapphire Bladesman will certainly be their equal. Real danger. Oof. Crumbling a tower and the frame rate with it. Damage done to the Seafarers also. The Trebuchet of Numenor still up here. It's mostly Numenor units, to be fair, that are now occupying the top of this hill, with one unit of Dragon's Wrath. So Rhun, with a little bit of backup from Numenor, trying to take the fight to Lothlorien and finish them off. It's a far more chaotic example of a battle on TOL FALAS than we normally see, perhaps. A lot of it does stem from the very weird composition that Winged Swordsman decided to go with as well, so I'm all for it when it results in interesting things like this, and there's still potentially match-changing units as well. Brotherhood of the Wain, an interesting unit, as we see they have managed to assassinate the Dwarven General in the end, the Elder Pathfinders. Didn't manage to get him out of there quickly enough. Of all the attacking factions, in fairness, the Blue Mountains are least likely, I think, to mass rout, and I include Lothlorien in that, actually. I think if it was just down to the lighter Lothlorien troops, they would probably end up faltering a little bit more quickly than standard dwarves. Meanwhile, High Thanes moving forward, the other very high-end dwarven unit in and amongst all of the Nurads. Again, all of these halberdiers wanting to get themselves into a good position. Here he Peng up on the hill as well, trying to deliver yet more of that elven damage. Elven King's Guard. That armour-piercing edge will be really helpful against the dwarves that have been seeing some success against some of Mirkwood's better units here. And the Dragon's Breath Cannon continues to fire away. There's not really any huge amount... What on earth is going on here? I don't know whether this is just a mad case of bouncing projectiles or what. Meanwhile, well, the Runic chariots have done their job, taking to the aggressive stance. Looks like it will be enough to help finish off Hidden and his Lothlorien force. Good aggressive actions here from Rhun. Dragon's Wrath crossbows getting involved in melee with Galathrun warriors. An interesting matchup, that. Again, there's many examples of little engagements where, depending on which way they go, they could have a real domino effect spreading throughout the battle. Or I guess butterfly effect is probably the better example of that. Dragon's Breath Cannon has been closed down in melee by Tweak's Haradrim though. And it's not been utterly devastating, the cannon, but it's definitely been a presence, routing some of the lower end Misty Mountains troops as well. So sheer kills alone, maybe not the best way of looking at that. And I mean, Southron Warband could end up routing here under heavy attentions from the Wain Riders. Victory seems certain. Still though, stabilising against a unit which they do have a bonus against. Dragon's Wrath, again, they're good in melee, but this is a pretty healthy unit of Trollman who will be able to crack through those golden scales. Strong crossbows. Again, this is looking a little bit chaotic, which tends to favour the more numerous force, which is almost always the attackers. Not always, but most often. Elder Council taking hits again from those poison projectiles. Continuous flow of them as well. High Thanes of Azaghal forcing their way up here. Going to try and prevent the Hiri Peng from continuing to fire. The more of these elven arrows that can be loosed and find a target, the more hopeful the defenders will be. See across the way as well. Oh, another attacking general, canned as well. Canned more susceptible to morale shocks than Ered Luin. Look at that chaos. No defending generals fallen yet. If that's just when they ran out of ammunition, that is very fortuitous for Alexios. I don't know. Although, I mean, again, if they were going after them javelins, it's more likely, I think, that Alexios had his hands forced and simply had to get these guys into melee to prevent a javelin massacre. Try and crack through that formation as well. The Elder Pathfinders have been a real pain, actually. Considering the odds they were facing, it's not bad cavalry play at all. They may be coming to the end of their usefulness now though, with Galathrun Riders and Haradrim Spearmen all around them. And chariots also coming in to try and grab a slice of the action. And indeed, there they all go. That general assassination, though, was bold. The lines in this battle are all over the place at this point. And Mirkwood are the ones on the receiving end of it more so than their allies. Although, you can see based on the minimap that it has, in terms of, it is localised chaos only rather than far-flung throughout the entire battlefield now. Lothlorien and their assault have been curtailed, and that means Rhun and all that remains of the Numenorian reinforcements can try and get over to give them a hand. Mirkwood Rangers. Good position to fire as well, good damage from Mirkwood. Still some blood trolls alive. Unit of Mirkwood Rangers which presumably are out of ammunition. And Farazim Swordmass as well, still healthy. Probably the single strongest melee combatant still alive. Still operational. Odenheim Shadow Bows, and still those Trollmen have done a really good job. They've actually saved the crew. Whether or not they will remount and whether or not that will be a factor in the latter stages does remain to be seen. Arrows flying overhead. Galathrun Riders, still the Demons of the Desert. That's the sort of unit which the defenders absolutely cannot allow to get any value at this late stage. If they do, it's It's looking very grim. Even as it is, I mean, the balance of power is still even. High Thanes victorious by the looks of things up here. Yeah, devastating. As you would expect, perhaps, from a Dwarven Phalanx unit. I mean, a multiple HP Phalanx unit as well, I believe. One of only 2 units off the top of my head to have that designation alongside the Carascaladon's Guardians, not present today from Lothlorien, but the Gatekeeper's a similar unit from Cardland, of course. Brotherhood of the Axe, getting in on the act. Now an Ira Royal Guard surrounded, and more instances of this. Is the defender's resolve, or just physical durability, starting to fail? Dragon's Wrath crossbows in a pretty good position, mind you. You need to be a bit careful of what they're shooting at. It's not worth the friendly fire into the Pharazim at this point. Radrim Spearmen loitering with intent. Mirkwood, their rangers, they've got a lot of high damage projectiles here. Whether or not they're going to be able to get the opportunity to use them to their fullest. I mean, Champions of Nafrat are one unit which they absolutely need to be dealing with some outside support, I would think. And the Champions of Nafrat, I think, know that because they're making a beeline to try and finish off what remains of a very depleted unit of crossbows. The Dragon's Wrath crossbows themselves are no slouches in melee, but it's a different matter entirely to go up against these guys. Will they get some good shots? It's only the front ranks of them that are really shooting at the moment. Some of them managing to squeeze through. It's the Storm Guard as well. Very depleted Storm Guard, but heavy hitters nonetheless. This is looking like it may fall into the category of valiant defender effort, but ultimately some of the messier moments in the battle may have cost them. Yeah, based on the lay of the land, it's not an impossibility, but it's difficult. Hits raining down on the demons, and we've seen this a couple of times already. Demons of the Desert successfully getting focused down in previous battles, and the same is true, for the moment anyway, of these guys having to flee as the Mirkwood Rangers start to target them. Pharazim Swordmaster is now going to turn around. The Dragon's Breath crew do remount, and now with a bit of support, Numenorian steel bows are fleeing, but it's a kind of all over the place an engagement at this point. Serpent Archers, the Rotting Meat having an effect, although of course it will affect friendly forces as well from the Numenorian Trebuchet, so they're throwing caution to the wind here, trusting in the mental resilience of primarily the Numenorians that are fighting down here, as well as a couple of the upper echelon of the Easterlings. Juggernauts wading in, having had their general assassinated. They're going to try and do things without him. Oh, Sapphire Bladesman as well, another good melee combatant. A good hit as well, right through the middle of the High Thanes, and it is actually enough for some of the depleted stone hewers to run. These are the sort of things which the defenders needed. The more of that can happen, the better it will be for them, and I think the High Thanes see what the damage could be, so they're going to try and close them down, although I would be surprised if the Pharazim Swordmasters didn't try and go after them. Maybe they think dealing with the demons, countermeasures, perhaps the more important thing here. Stone Hewers, only 4 of them. It's close, isn't it? It is very close. Mirkwood Rangers victorious in whatever footnote of an engagement that was. Champions of Nafrat pushing right on through the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, still going hammer and tongs with the Nurad Storm Guard. Actually, the Storm Guard are another multiple HP unit, aren't they, with a long weapon? And I see why. Will they get this shot off? No, is the answer. Fine margins. Mirkwood Rangers will, of course, be able to outrun the champions, but if they're running, they're not shooting. defenders would much prefer all of those resources be put to good use here. Brotherhood of the Axe. Spearguard of Thorin's Halls. I mean, they're doing a good job now, but I think that's mostly because of the Juggernauts. And they are taking a few hits from afar as well. Mirkwood Rangers. Do they have anything other than the Trebuchet up here? No. The Trebuchet crew themselves, actually. Those hammers. Could be an interesting final challenge for the attackers. South Rhun archers doing their thing. See some Numenorian steel bows over there, so Numenor weirdly seem to be in possession of the hill that they initially lost. Finishing off some routing units, making sure they can't come back, and then presumably they'll get down here to get involved with the fight as it continues. Dragon's Breath crew, 5 of them only remain now. Sapphire Bladesmen, those High Thanes, only 9 of them, but they too have been an impressive performer. Juggernauts against Pharazim Swordmasters is a bit of a clash of the titans, isn't it? Battling back and forth. Brotherhood of the Axe involved, Dragon's Wrath crossbows. Everything's looking a little bit depleted, a little bit forlorn at this point. 100 Trebuchet of Numenor crew might be fairly insurmountable. And that's the Runic General, I believe. I think that is the first defending general to actually fall. Champions of Nafra. I mean, this really is the strongest unit I think the attackers still have left. 60 Champions of Nafra. Everything is centering ever more so on this engagement, and more attacking units are arriving. Is the sheer might of the Pharazim Swordmasters going to be enough? I don't know. Remounting that artillery could be really significant. Javelins from the High Thanes as well. It's little things. There would definitely be things that I will have missed in this battle as well, which will have contributed to whatever the outcome may be from here. The steel bows do now return, although I'm going to try with the Mirkwood Rangers. I'm going to try and deal with some of the Brotherhood of the Axe. Still the morale debuffing effect of those stench clouds in places. There's the 100 Trebuchetmen. Champions of Nafrat do arrive. Pharazim Swordmasters starting to take a real beating. They're strong, but they're being asked to deal with the best of Harad, the best of Ered Luin, and some extra besides. No assistance left anymore. And the High Thanes are not daft. They know to try and keep the Warlords' Dragon's Breath crew away. Mirkwood Rangers and those 100 hammers are going to be required, one way or the other, because at the moment this is a losing fight for the defenders. Still have ammunition, by the way. Alexios is moving his units. Harad General? Again, it's only really the Champions of Nafrat that remain, so at this point morale debuffs are not really going to be the most important thing, but still, it is a sign that damage is being done. Yeah, that damage, man. The Pharazim Swordmasters may end up falling here, but the more damage those Rangers can do, still 100 decent quality units left to deal with after this, after all, but I'm leaning still towards the attackers, honestly. Numenor's General falls. I guess the Mirkwood General has already perished? Or is he over here? Doesn't look like it. They're all Rangers. Trebuchet crew maybe lagging just a little bit too far behind. If they've been committed a bit earlier, but again, that would be a harsh criticism to level at them, I think. The Dragon's Breath crew, though, if they can mount that artillery, if they can get one shot off into the middle mass here, it might be enough damage for the Rangers and the Trebuchet crew to take this home, but I think they will need that. Just the nature of these units over here. I mean, 35 Juggernauts, 31 Champions of Nafarat. There's still a few other bits and pieces in there as well. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't think you're in a situation where you can retreat from the artillery, honestly. Maybe try and get a downhill charge on the High Thanes and force the issue. I mean, it's unlikely to result in anything good, but at this point, it's all or nothing. Throw caution to the wind. Juggernauts doing their thing, and I mean, Champions of Nafarat. Trebuchet of Numenor crew shaken. Like I said, they are accomplished melee fighters, but they do better against armoured units, of course, and ultimately, as an artillery crew, there is a limited amount that they're going to be truly able to do. Mirkwood Rangers, yeah, getting caught ultimately by the Juggernauts, and even more so than the Wardens of Thorin's Halls, the Juggernauts are very good at facing off against elves. Huge defensive values in melee. Far too much for the likes of Mirkwood Rangers to have to deal with. He is a distinct possibility still for the Trebuchet of Numenor crew, but yeah, High Thanes finishing off the Dragon's Breath crew. So Rhun the first of the defenders to fall. Mirkwood Rangers, the last of Mirkwood's units. Will they last longer than the Trebuchet of Numenor crew? Maybe. I mean, the Trebuchet of Numenor crew putting on a brave front. Close battle though. Very competitive, very chaotic. You can just see, I mean, usually when it's an organised siege, there are localised areas. That hilltop is usually one, but when you look at the spread of engagements that happen down here and throughout the entire settlement, I mean, there's scarcely an area of the map on this sort of quadrant of it that hasn't seen some sort of combat. 15 Mirkwood Rangers at this point is not going to suffice, unfortunately, for the defenders, but a good effort nonetheless. Trebuchet crew still refusing to rout. I have to say, actually, I mean, they may be depleted at this point, but the High Thanes proved themselves to be a very effective unit in this battle indeed. In the couple of instances we've seen them in melee engagements, they've been a good performer for Ered Luin. Just in general, their quality injection with the numbers of Harad and Canned. Really good conventional attack over here, which did devolve into chaos really, but the idea at least was conventional. There goes the Trebuchet crew. Whereas there was nothing really conventional about the way that the Misty Mountains and Lothlorien approached things. They did fall away actually. They were the first two factions to fall in this battle, but ultimately it was a result of how they did things really, that Mirkwood had to send over reinforcements and all things went a little bit peculiar from there. So they definitely played their part. Winged Swordsman in particular, with that peculiar army composition, I think was one of the main drivers of how chaotic this battle ultimately turned out to be. So fair play to him. Defeat seems certain, you don't say. 11 Mirkwood Rangers, having a look. Yeah, I mean, technically dead even, though of course routing does play its part in that as well. TOL, FALAS, a siege battle that doesn't come with a town centre, so the defenders are able to rout off the field as well. And I guess they can actually go on foot now into the wastes. TOL, FALAS in the winter with the receded oceans falls to the attackers here, but by the narrowest of margins really. Having a look at what did the damage, I mean, again, based on the level of damage dealing potential and the kind of armies that they were going up against, Rhun lagging behind. In fact, it splits into 1,000 increments, really. Interesting that Numenor got the most. I mean, they had some good melee engagements early on, and artillery played a part in that, of course, and their archers actually were probably in better positions than the Elven ones, which does make sense, although I think some of the finer details of what Alexios was doing was good as well. Rhun probably got a bit of a raw deal. I mean, it's a weird force to go up against when you're defending, Lothlorien, which are more well known for quality, not necessarily being the most natural attackers, and then the Misty Mountains going for a very unorthodox pick. I mean, interestingly enough, the Misty Mountains, even with huge amounts of trolls and drakes, still had more men deployed than the elves, which kind of proves my point that I was going on about anyway. And actually more than, well, the Blue Mountains had the fewest units on the field, so more quality for Joey Wan Kenobi, but it ended up paying off for him. Let's see what did the damage for Tommy's army, the Khandish force. Nurad Stormguard, I mean, they were right in the thick of things from that early to mid section of the battle, where they did start to push forward as a result of the chaos in the settlement, and they ultimately were very depleted by the end. I think actually by the end they were all completely killed, but still, very good performance from them. Blood Trolls, good amount of damage, even if you're against a force which is much superior in terms of quality, and you're relying more on numbers. Stuff like the Blood Trolls, in much the same way as it does with Orcish factions, gives you that spike of damage, makes you dangerous, and can also help you claim the momentum, though here it was more about, I think, the damage and dealing with forces that have been cut off. 221 on Brotherhood of the Axe is very effective as well, so most of those were probably against Numenorian units as well, so that's a good return. Nurad Footmen, decent performances from them. Brotherhood of the Wain, I mean, they were hanging around, not a huge amount of kills from them with their bolts, but still, potential nuisance. And for stuff like chariots and elephant class units, it can often be what they make your opponent not do, as much as what you actually do with them in a more practical sense. So yeah, big thank you to Tommy for sending this battle replay, and it's been quite a while since we've seen TOL FALAS, and it's been never since we saw TOL FALAS quite that chaotic. Big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay and making it what it was. The next siege battle that comes out will be kind of similar to this, in the sense that it's a bit wacky in terms of the factions that are intermingling with one another, but it's another siege similar to this, and it's on like a classic, sort of classic in quotation marks, cityscape map. I think it's the old version of Merlond, or something along those lines, but you'll know it when you see it if you've been following the channel for any length of time. And considering the new patch has been grinding through all of these newer maps, it's kind of nice after giving it a bit of a break to go back through some of these older maps as well. So that will be the next siege battle. Tournament battles and maybe the odd Last Alliance replay sort of intermingled throughout as well. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again, and to Tommy in particular. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.